Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Hot Takes, the show where I take your hot takes you leave in the comment section over the last week of videos and react to them in kind. Got our first hot take from Quincy, who says this. It's already baked in that Denzel's going to miss 4 to 6 games every year. Every year. It just is what it is. It was a pretty popular sentiment. I think it was the top liked comment, but somebody pops in. He says, I know it feels that way, but he only missed 1 game last year. The perception of how many games recently that Denzel Ward misses versus what's actually the reality with Denzel Ward could not be more further apart, right? Denzel Ward feels like a guy who only plays 10 games a year, but that's not the case. Denzel usually misses 1, maybe 2 games over the last couple of years. So yeah, it's interesting how in our minds, because we always hear Denzel Ward, he had something happen in practice, he might be questionable for the game, or Denzel Ward might be in concussion protocol, and that kind of makes us automatically assume that he's going to be out. But if you go back and you look at it, most of the times he plays through those injuries, or he clears concussion protocol. He's one of those guys you really just got to look at the game snaps to really figure out what your opinion is of him and his availability. Because I think what people think it is not what it is for Denzel Ward. The next one comes from Not Brian Block, who says, I don't get how people don't understand that the thing that's actually sabotaging Shadore are the people trying so hard to say that he's getting sabotaged. I talk about this phenomenon all the time because, unfortunately, since Cleveland hasn't had a quarterback, we've been exposed to this a disproportionate amount of times as a fan base. And what I mean is, when a young quarterback or a young player comes around, right, and a lot of people are hopeful that this player could be the answer, there is always going to be a rush the second that player shows any ability to put that player on a pedestal and deem this long-term answer found. We did this with Baker Mayfield. I remember way back in the day, preseason excitement over Deshaun Kaiser. We did the same thing with Brian Hoyer. There is always, even Johnny Manziel, right? Like, there's a rush to put a player on a pedestal. And when a player is put on a pedestal that they are early for or they don't belong on, a lot of people are going to look up and say, that don't look right. And when you hear people say that don't look right and you're invested in putting that player up in the on the pedestal, you're going to take offense to that. What do you mean that doesn't look right? I'm looking at it right now and I think it looks right? It's personal to you because now you've gotten to the point to where you need to believe that player belongs on that pedestal because you've made that player being on that pedestal far too important for you because you want to prove other points with that player being on that pedestal. So now that is something you can't give up. And when that fight is going on, the second that player does something to prove he doesn't belong on that pedestal, I know I've said that word a lot, but it's for a good reason. But the second that player shows you he doesn't belong on a pedestal, people will rush to tear that player down and tear that player off of it. I've seen this happen in large scale with Baker Mayfield, in smaller scale with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I begged people not to do this after we drafted Shadore Sanders because of this, and I got called a killjoy for suggesting this, right? I remember I posted the video, hey, let's try to not lose our mind. If it's going to happen, let it happen. But let's please, there's no reason to be early. And people called me a killjoy. Some people called me a hater for wanting to avoid this. And lo and behold, we saw this whole cycle play out in a preseason for Shadore Sanders, and it's really just an appetizer to what we could see in the regular season. Because what we saw this preseason was people up in arms about the fact that he wasn't drafted where they swear he was going to be drafted. And then using that draft status that proved to be inaccurate, right? Again, the whole he's a top 5 pick, that just proved to be inaccurate. Using that draft status as a justification to hype this player up. Using practice stats of all things, which are, look, practice matters. How you perform in practice matters. But the charting and the stats in practice don't give a damn about that, right? Like that's not, we don't have enough information for those stats to be useful is my point. But propping that up, practice stats, that's where I knew we were headed down this path. Because people were using practice stats to prop Shadore up on a pedestal and then making arguments about that, imagining that Shadore was on this pedestal. Oh, man, how is he not getting first-team reps? It's obvious he should be getting first-team reps. He's the best player out there, all this stuff. And all that wasn't true. It was just a misread of the whole entire situation. So when the games actually happen and we see Shadore play in the preseason, and then he makes it obvious in the last preseason game that he's not ready, all of a sudden the reality that was holding up Shadore on that pedestal crashes in, and everybody's getting their shit in on it. This is why I have learned over the years to try not to overhype players. I've done this myself, right? Perion Winfrey's a great example of a player that I got way too excited about. I pumped up, put him on a pedestal, and once the moment came for him to be tore down, boy, did I never hear the end of it. And fair enough, right? So I understand this not because I'm better than it, but because I've literally done it. I've been in the cycle so many times. It's not good for the player, okay? This is not good for Shadore Sanders. This is a burden to Shadore Sanders, how this whole thing has been handled nationally. This is something that's going to prevent him from finding opportunity if he has to go somewhere other than Cleveland to find opportunity. This could be something that prevents him from finding opportunity because the coaching staff doesn't want to answer stupid Shadore questions all the time. I think this commenter is absolutely right. You know, I think the crowd that surrounds Shadore does not realize that what they're doing to Shadore is actually not very helpful. You know, again, it's one thing to have a support system. It's one thing to have supporters. I don't think having fans is a bad thing. I think Shadore having fans is a good thing. But when these fans start using you for other arguments, which requires them doing what they've been doing over the last couple of weeks in your name, it's not a good thing for that player. And he's not the only athlete we've seen this happen to. There's an effect of this with Caitlin Clark. The same thing happens with like Angel Reese, where players who are perfectly good, you know, great players, maybe not where their fans say they are, but good players, cause these outsized reactions. And then like you can't ever talk anything normal about them. So most people who just want to talk about the sports would rather just avoid them entirely. That's how you get here, right? The conversation around Shadore is just awful right now. Dev says, bro, wild how much people are glazing. If he did well, Shadore, the Browns are wasting his career. When he does bad, the Browns are wasting his career. Yeah, and this is what the conclusion I've come to and why I'm at the point now to where I don't care about any, you know, theory people have about how the Browns could have avoided any level of controversy with how they've handled Shadore. It seems obvious to me that that the Browns were going to be made the villain no matter what happens with Shadore Sanders. If Shadore Sanders is successful, people are going to make it that he overcame the Browns. If Shadore Sanders is not successful, well, then it's the Browns' fault. You know, nobody's going to actually look at this objectively. Nobody's going to look at this without some kind of bias in mind. They're just going to come into it with whatever shit they were bringing in. And it's clear to me that that's kind of what people want to do. So, like, I'm past the point of trying to evaluate whether or not the Browns could have handled this specifically in a different way or worded stuff in a different way to not have this be the reaction. Because I think what's obvious is that this is just what's going to be the reaction no matter what, because this is what people wanted to do. Dragon the Abandoner says here, I think a lot of people, including myself, might end up owing AB an apology for being upset over the Dillon pick, but it's looking like more and more they were right. Maybe Dillon was the only quarterback in the draft Kevin felt could operate his system to his liking. Maybe that explains why they took him so high. I don't know if the pick will be justified, right? We got to see Dillon play in some real games, and he's got to actually do stuff in the NFL for the pick to be justified. What I can say at this point is I understand the pick, right? I am no longer confused about why they selected Dillon Gabriel. It does make sense to me. I can see what Kevin saw in him, and I'm willing to concede that maybe Dillon Gabriel had more interest in the draft than maybe the outside scouting community thought he did. Because if this is what he looks like, I could see more than just the Browns being interested in that player, despite the fact that he's not the biggest guy in the world, obviously. All right, the next one comes from Expensive Freedom, says they got rid of so many guys I hated. Deontay Johnson, Pierre Strong, Dustin Hopkins. Man, I love some of the moves made this offseason. Doesn't mean they'll work, but it feels like this organization's being aggressively, incompetently. There's a new feeling for Browns fans. Here's what I will say. Over the last 5 years, I think for me, the reason why I do still think that this front office can be very successful and this coaching staff can be very successful, despite up and down performances over the last 5 years, is because they have shown the ability to learn from their mistakes. Last year, they had a pretty lackadaisical camp. It led to a pretty lackadaisical start to the season. And immediately this year, what did they do? They had a more physical camp. They looked a lot. They played more physical in the joint practices. They played starters for a period of time in the preseason. And all of a sudden, I like to approach the camp a lot better, right? They've adjusted there. Last year, the offense was a mess. Instead of doubling down on Ken Dorsey, they said, no, we're going to get rid of Ken Dorsey. We're going to go back to what we're doing. And the Browns offense looks a lot more competent than it did during training camp last year. There is a lot to be critical of Kevin and AB for. There's a lot of success relative to the Cleveland Browns since '99. There's a lot of failure that the Browns have had. But I think that this is a team this is a front office that is competent as of right now. And, they know they're humble enough to learn from their mistakes, which I think is also a good thing. But that's it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.